we should be the carriers of confidence. Real show is about to begin.
Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa asahbihi ajma'een, amma ba'd. Qala Allah ta'ala fil Qur'an al-Kareem, a'udhu billahi minash shaytanir rajim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim, am khuluqu min ghayri shay'in, am humul khaliqun, am khalaqu as-samawati wal ard, bala yuqinun. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome all today. I would like to thank the organisers for inviting me down. I was here on a personal visit, and they suggested that maybe it would be good, because I think maybe they heard one or two of my debates in the past, that I would come and maybe share some discussions over this topic about proof of the existence of the Creator. I'd also like to thank Dr. Peter Slezak for also attending and making it more of a proper discussion from two opposing or two different angles on this question whether a creator exists or not. Today, obviously, the debate is on this subject: belief in a creator, the origins of the universe. And we obviously know as Muslims, or many of us who are Muslims know, that this is a central tenet in the Islamic faith. Something very important, something that defines us as a Muslim, belief in a creator. But we also know that in the last few years, we have seen Islam and the Muslim community constantly under the focus, under the media spotlight. People also going further in the demonization of the Muslim community and demonization of Islam. And there are certain people like Dawkins, Sam Harris, Lawrence Krauss, who have perpetuated this demonization of Islam and the Muslims under the veneer of intellectualism. This idea that there is a problem with the Muslim community or the Muslim globally, and that it's because of their belief in the Creator, belief in Islam, that somehow has caused all of the problems, whether we see that in Syria, whether we see in Iraq or Palestine or Afghanistan, and that it's decontextualized from the political environment. And so many Muslims have faced, and many, we've come across many discussions where Muslims are constantly being harangued about their belief in the Creator specifically. They turn around and they say, these types of neo-atheists, they say that religion is the root of all evil and Islam is the worst one of the lot. So we want to try and understand maybe one of the contentions that some of these people bring up, and I know Peter Slezak is not of that particular persuasion of atheism, but we want to bring up some of the discussions related to this central tenet of the belief in a creator, which is tenet of Islam, which is the belief in the Creator. Now, before I go on and explain how we prove, or because as Muslims we believe we can prove rationally that a Creator exists, I think it's important that we look at the approach to that belief. How do we approach it from an intellectual perspective? Because many times we hear the discussion that if I cannot see something, I cannot hear something, I cannot taste something, then I don't believe it exists. Effectively, they're saying the only thing that I will accept that exists is what I can sense directly. Anything outside of what I can sense directly, I don't believe exists. And in fact, they further go on to say, and they say, if we can't put it in a test tube, we can't test it, we can't subject it to special scientific conditions, then it is not true. Because the only sole basis of truth is what? Is science. So if this discussion about God, can we test God? Can we hear God? Can we see God? If this is outside of this, then therefore God does not exist, because God is not a scientific hypothesis that could be tested. However, we need to really break this question down. Is really science the only basis by which we determine truths of the universe and what we sense around? And maybe if I can give you a few examples of this. The first example, I give this example all the time, to be honest, so if you've heard this debate, forgive me, yeah? But I give the example of the Mona Lisa. Now science will tell us, if it looks at the Mona Lisa, that painting, it will tell us the material of the canvas. It will tell us the material of the paint. It will tell us the reflection of light at a specific wavelength and specific energy. It will tell us a lot of detail about what's within the sense parameters of that painting. But science itself cannot determine that there was a man from the, was it 15th or 16th century, Leonardo da Vinci, who painted Mona Lisa. That means that therefore, if we can't determine it by science, it doesn't mean therefore we don't believe that Leonardo da Vinci existed or that it was or that he painted Mona Lisa. Similarly, if somebody was to say that I have a great-great-great-great-great-grandfather who I don't know where the grave is, I don't know where he lived, I don't have any DNA records of this individual, I don't have a birth certificate of this individual, we wouldn't say because this great-great-great-great-great-grandfather is outside of the experimental field that we didn't have one. And another example, Professor Steve Jones, he asked a question in his book, The Single Helix. Can we determine whether a mouse has consciousness? And he says no, because it's outside of the data that we can collate. But even more fundamentally, can we determine that human beings have consciousness? Because when we look and sense the issue of consciousness, if we take a very strictly empirical approach, what are we sensing? We may sense the brain, we may sense the neurons, we may sense action potentials, we may sense neurotransmitters that cross the synaptic cleft. You know, some of you who do biology will know all of these things. But are we actually sensing consciousness per se directly? And just because that discussion of not being able to touch it, feel it, see it, or being able to recreate consciousness in a laboratory, in a computer program, doesn't therefore mean that consciousness doesn't exist. So what does this indicate? This indicates that science is good at determining those things we can directly sense or put into a test tube. But beyond that, we require another methodology. And as Muslims, we would say this is dalil aqli, dalil of the mind, evidence of the mind, or rational proofs, as we'd say in English. And fundamentally, what we are looking at, or what we're trying to identify, is the implication of the sensed event. We are looking at what is the implication of what we see or sense around us in order to conclude whether a creator exists or not. And in this particular context, whether a creator exists or not, then what we are fundamentally asking about, is whether the universe could be self-sufficient. Does it require any external cause or creator that it depends upon in order for it to exist? Or could it be self-sustaining in one way or another? So where do we start with the proof? We obviously start what we can see around us, what we can sense. And whatever we sense around us, we can come to certain conclusions. One of those conclusions is that everything that we sense has some sort of limitation, some sort of attributes. So it has, for example, my phone, a certain size, a certain weight. It can't do everything. It can only do certain things, has a certain energy output. It has limits. And we sense that with all the things around us within the universe, that they are limited and defined with particular attributes in one way or another. The second thing is that they're all dependent. That what we have sensed, which are limited, are also dependent upon something else. So the mobile phone is dependent upon the charger to charge it up, and it's a smartphone. I won't say which make, but you have to charge it every 4 hours, so it's very dependent. Or, for example, the sun will be dependent upon the fusion of hydrogen, or nebulas are dependent upon supernovas. So each thing that we sense is limited and also is dependent. And this leads us to certain possibilities. But before I go into those possibilities, let me just explain this maybe a little bit further by an example. And I might go into a bit of science. But the science isn't the important thing here. It's those two things, limited and dependent, which is important. So I want to give you an example of my phone. Like I said, it's limited. Size, shape, certain shape, certain weight. And it's dependent. What is the phone dependent upon? Charger, battery, electricity. So I need to plug it in. Electricity, same thing, has a certain limitation, a certain amount of energy. It's dependent upon the flow of electrons from a high region of electronegativity to a low region of electronegativity. And electricity is also dependent upon, it's dependent upon power plants. And power plants themselves, they require an energy source in order to produce steam that drives the turbines, that produces the electricity. So believe it or not, my mobile phone is steam powered. Yeah, it's not just electricity, but it's also steam powered. Now, in order to get that steam, you may need maybe either solar cells, or you may need coal or gas or oil that burns and produces the heat that produces the water to turn into steam that drives that. And we know that the coal or the gas, they are the result of the decay of organic matter over millions of years under heat and pressure. And we can even go further and say, well, this organic matter, these plants perhaps, they themselves are dependent. Plants are dependent upon what? Sunlight. Yeah, just making sure you're all awake and you're following it. So they're dependent upon sunlight. Yeah. And we know that the sunlight is itself limited, the amount of energy, the size, the shape, the sun, and it's dependent upon the fusion of hydrogen. Again, I'm going to go to maybe some technical areas, but it's not it's not that technical, but it's not the technicality, it's the fact that things are limited and dependent that's important. The sun itself is dependent upon the fusion of hydrogen, which is gas that exists within the universe, that comes under together under gravitational force and through pressure. As the mass increases, forces the hydrogen atoms to fuse to produce heavier atoms. The sun or the gas that's dependent upon the nebulas that exist, these regions of space which have gas and dust within them, which themselves are dependent upon supernovas, which are stars which have exploded and spewed out all this gas and dust, which itself are dependent upon perhaps other stars or other nebulas, which itself is dependent upon the Big Bang. According to certain theories, the Big Bang itself is dependent upon a quantum singularity. The quantum singularity itself is dependent upon membranes that collide and produce Big Bangs. Membranes themselves are dependent upon superstring theory. Superstring theory is dependent upon the supercluster theory. Okay, I'm making it up now. But you can see that from my mobile phone, there was a chain of events. Each in that chain of events was limited and dependent. One thing dependent upon something else. Now, we've got three possibilities, and I hope I have time. I don't know how much time I've got. Yeah.
8 minutes.
Oh, that's good. Should be 8 minutes, inshallah. So there's certain possibilities. The first possibility is that limited dependent things depend upon each other in a chain of events that go back forever. What we term an infinite regression. So one thing dependent upon another thing, dependent upon another thing, ad infinitum, forever. The second possibility is that things are codependent, mutual dependency. So one theory that exists within science is that you have a Big Bang where the universe explodes out, and then the universe reaches a certain size, and then it comes back together under the force of gravity called the Big Crunch till it gets to that point in space, that singularity, and then it explodes out. And this keeps oscillating in that way. The third possibility is that the universe and all limited things just popped into existence for no reason, by nothing, and for no particular purpose. And the final possibility is that there must be something other than limited or other than dependent that caused the universe. What we would term the creator, which we'd say is unlimited and independent. So let's just go through very quickly each of these possibilities. First possibility, that this chain of events that goes back forever. We would say that's impossible. If, and it's an example that's used by other people, and I've used this example for many, many years, so I'm going to keep using this example. If, for example, you imagine a soldier on the battlefield, and he's about to shoot, but he doesn't shoot because he's an obedient soldier, he waits for orders. So he says to his captain, I don't know the chain of command, but he'll turn to his, we'll call him captain. He says, Captain, do I have the orders to shoot? And he says, no, wait, let me find out from the lieutenant. So he turns to the lieutenant. Lieutenant says, wait, don't give the orders, let me find out from the sergeant. The sergeant says, wait, let me find out from the general. The general says, wait, don't give the orders, let me find out from the president. The president says, wait, let me find out from the Senate. And this chain of command goes back forever. Would the soldier on the battlefield ever get the orders to shoot? No, because he'll be waiting forever He'll be waiting for the first initiation of the order. So if my mobile phone had to wait for electricity, which had to wait for power plants, which had to wait for CERN, which had to wait for nebulas, which had to wait for supernovas, which had to wait for a Big Bang, which had to wait for quantum singularity, which had to wait for something else, and that had to wait for something else, and that goes back forever, would my mobile phone work? No. But the fact that my mobile phone works means there must have been an initiation, some sort of event that initiated other things. Now somebody would say, well, what about this second plausible explanation? This mutual dependency. The universe went from a Big Bang, Big Crunch, and it just keeps oscillating like this. Now there's a number of ways of demonstrating why that's wrong. One way is that actually falls into an infinite regression anyway. So we just said infinite regression is wrong, and that's a form of infinite regression. The second way is to think about that question, which is if the Big Bang, before the Big Bang exists, you need a Big Crunch of the universe, and before the Big Crunch you need a Big Bang, then it sounds like another analogy. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? Yeah? What comes first, the Big Bang or the Big Crunch? Because one is required before the other. And if each one is requiring itself, then again, nothing exists. So it requires something outside of that cycle, outside of that limited dependency. The third thing, which is that universe just popped into nothingness, which is something which is a bit on vogue at the moment with some of the scientists and theoretical physicists. What they really mean, however, is not nothing. They don't really mean nothing. And one professor, he's an American-Japanese professor, Michio Kaku. He's a professor of theoretical physics at the City University in New York. He asked, how can it be that everything comes to nothing? His solution, he says, if you think about it for a while, you'll begin to realize it all depends upon how you define nothing. So how does something come from nothing? Well, it depends how you define nothing. He goes, I think, and he goes on to mention, he goes, I think there's two kinds of nothing. First, there is something I call absolute nothing. No equations, no space, no time, no anything that human mind can conceive of. Just nothing. And then he goes, then there's another type of nothing. Then he goes, there is the vacuum, which is nothing but the absence of matter. So within it exists space, exists time, exists equations, exists potential gravitational forces as well on the quantum level, and also energy. And then he goes on to say, he goes, so for me, the universe did not come from absolute nothing. That is a state of no equations, no empty space, no time. It came from a pre-existing state. He's saying the quantum singularity itself that produced the Big Bang came from something else, which wasn't nothing, but they just label it as nothing. It had something within it. So really, what some of these scientists do is they fudge the argument. They try and say it is from nothing, but then they say, well, it's some kind of nothing. So what we find as a result is we've looked at the three possibilities out of the four. Could the universe exist in a limited chain of events that goes back forever? No, the phone wouldn't work. Could it exist in a cycle from a Big Bang and Big Crunch? No, like a chicken and the egg argument, so it can't exist. Could it come from nothing? Well, even the scientists that propose the argument from nothing are not even saying nothing. They are saying it is a something, but they're labeling it as nothing. So therefore that leaves us with only one possibility to explain, that there must be something independent. Independent, which means that it doesn't fall into a cycle, doesn't fall into a chain, and didn't come itself from nothing, but was eternal. For it to be independent then, it needs to be other than what we sense, which is dependent. And we said that everything in the universe is of two characteristics. What were they? Limited and dependent. So if it's independent, it must be unlimited, as opposed to having the limits and attributes and subject to causality. So it's independent. Now somebody may say, I don't know how long I've got now. 2 minutes. Somebody may say, well, how do we know that this is a creator in like a sentient, self-aware creator that chose to create? Other people might turn around and say, it could be a mechanical force. We would say that if you had a mechanical force that was compelled to create, and the mechanical force was independent, eternal, then the effect would be eternal, wouldn't it? Because it's every time you have the cause, you'd have the effect. If you have a cause, and then the effect is decided, i.e. it's a temporal began, then this implies that the cause chose when to create. i.e. that shows that the independent, unlimited Creator had a choice in the creation of the universe, chose and therefore was self-aware. As Muslims, we believe, obviously this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as Muslims, we understand that this is encapsulated in the surah of Quran, Surah Al-Ikhlas, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they say, declare, Allah is ahad, He is unique, nothing is comparable like Him. Allah Samad, He is eternal, everything depends upon Him, but He depends upon no one else. Lam yalid wa lam yulad, neither He begets nor was He begotten. Wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad, and nothing and no one is comparable in equal to the Creator. Aqulu qawli hadha wa astaghfirullah walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Thank you very much.